sure it is obvious from what you see behind me, but I am a gamer and I've been playing games and collecting games for quite some time. I've actually been playing games since I was a little kid and collecting them since around my teenage years. But something I've never done is talk about the Lost Media video games, and trust me, there's tons. So here and there you're going to see videos talking about Lost Media from different consoles, from the oldest consoles to as modern as I can get. So we're going to start with one of the oldest consoles debuting in the late 1970s, the Atari 2600.
Now, technically, the oldest home game console is a Magnavox Odyssey, a console that was released in 1972 where the games were simply 2 dots on a screen and needed overlays and other accessories in order to make them actual games. But in 1977, the Atari 2600 made its debut, and it introduced a world of games that looked like actual video games. Granted, with subpar graphics in today's times, but amazing graphics in 1977. The Atari 2600 is a staple in gaming for many reasons, including both starting and nearly killing the world of video games with the game crash of 1983, something we will discuss more in a future video.
Now, the Atari 2600 has lots and lots of lost games, so I feel like this is the perfect place to start. So let's look at the lost games of the Atari 2600.
We know we can count on you to do what Smokey says.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
The first game we are going to discuss is Smokey Bear, a game that was going to release in 1983 and was based on the advertising icon Smokey the Bear, who was used to advocate the prevention of forest fires.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. One of some matches and that's no good. Listen to Smokey before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rooftop fighting. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous forest is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
In 1983, a game was set to release that was going to be developed by a company called Data Age, a company mostly known for the Atari games Journey Escape, a game that starred the 70s rock band Journey, and Frankenstein's Monster. Smokey Bear was worked on after the release of Journey Escape. It was going to be an educational game targeted at kids aged 4 to 8. The game was fully completed, but was abruptly cancelled due to the company's previous game Journey Escape doing so poorly that the company couldn't afford the licensing fees that were needed to legally release the game, and the video game crash of 83 most likely contributed to it as well. Nothing from this completed game has surfaced, leaving the game completely lost.
Say, Mr. Bill, where are you going?
I'm on my way to a big Hollywood party at Ken and Barbie's. Gee, I sure hope G.I. Joe is there.
Well, how about some Coke first to help get you in the mood?
Well, I'd rather a diet soda. You know, I've been trying to cut down on my sweets.
Well, here comes your agent, Sluggo, and he says all he has is Coke.
No, wait, no.
Mr. Bill's Neighborhood was another canceled Data Age game that was set to release alongside Smokey Bear, and much like Smokey Bear, it was fully complete before its cancellation. This game, however, was based on Mr. Bill, a clay figure who would make appearances on Saturday Night Live.
Here, hold it up, nice and firm.
Oh, you be careful there. I don't know if I like this.
No, it's simple. Here, just hold it steady.
No, wait.
The plot of the game was that you had to save Mr. Bill from not only his neighborhood, but his evil arch-rival Sluggo. Saving him isn't easy though, as the escape would be filled with traffic, dead-end roads, and Mr. Hands, who would push Mr. Bill closer to Sluggo. As previously mentioned, this is another canceled Data Age game and was fully complete, meaning it was canceled due to Journey Escape flopping, as well as the video game crash. The license for the game would go back to Mr. Bill's creator, Walter Williams, once Data Age shut its doors. Another Mr. Bill game wouldn't be released until 2010, when 2 games were released on the Apple Store. As for the Atari games, no ROM has been released as of recording of this video, and it remains fully lost to time.
Rooty toot Kimble Loopy Loo, Boppity Stompity Romper Room and friends.
Up next, we have a canceled series of games that were going to be based on Romper Room, an American children's show that ran from 1953 until 1994. The games were going to be developed by Spectra Video, a company manufacturer and software company known for games like Planet Patrol and Gangster Alley. As for the show Romper Room, the show would use a mix of puppets, real hosts, games, cartoons, and more to teach a variety of basic subjects to preschool-aged children. The show honestly has a similar feel to Sesame Street, however, I can't say they copied them, as Romper Room predates Sesame Street by 16 years. Christ. The games that were set to release were going to be, as you would guess, educational games, and were going to be hosted by one of the show's puppet characters, Doobie. The games were going to be titled Doobie's First Alphabet, Romper's Room Countdown to Fun, and A Street Where You Live. All 3 games were canceled, most likely due to, once again, the video game crash of 83, given the fact that these games were supposed to come out that same year.
So one of the best things that came out in the late 70s and early 80s is fucking Star Wars. Starting with A New Hope, and then Empire Strikes Back, and then finally Return of the Jedi, which, fun fact, that is not the original title.
Return of the Jedi was originally called Revenge of the Jedi, as the original draft for the third movie had Luke and Leia going on an adventure to save Han Solo from Boba Fett, which would make the name Revenge of the Jedi work, and that title would stick around long enough that it would be featured on promotional merchandise, and the crew would receive jackets with the name on it, one of which was featured on Storage Wars. Now, while the film was under that name, 2 games were planned by Atari, simply being titled Revenge of the Jedi Game 1 and Game 2. Not much is known about these 2 games, but both games would have featured scenes from the movie, and box art for both games were leaked, thanks to photos being featured in the 1983 CES catalog, as well as the Parker Brothers 100th anniversary catalog. Pictures of a television version of the game were also found. Aside from that, the box art for the second game was repurposed for another game that was also cancelled, titled Star Wars Return of the Jedi Ewok Adventure, which is also the game with the most information. The game was set to release in 1983 and would have been the last Star Wars game released for the Atari 2600. It also would have been a sequel to Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle, which was developed by Parker Brothers and also released in 1983. Ewok Adventure was fully completed and would have had you play as an Ewok flying on a paraglider. Your overall goal is to destroy the shield generator during one of the film's most famous scenes, the Battle of Endor.
It's a trap!
Light is coming in.
As previously mentioned, the game was completed but was cancelled due to overly hard controls, and the game was put into the vault to remain lost forever. But in 1997, one of the game's developers, Larry Gelberg, gave the only known prototype copy to his coworker's son, who sold the cart for $1,680.
Since then, ROMs in the game have been dumped online, rendering it found. So technically this isn't lost media, but the other 2 games are lost, so yeah. Next! So I'm sure the year this game came out confuses you, because the Atari 2600 run ended in 1992. Well, that's because this game is what's called a homebrew.
A homebrew is a game that is made by your average everyday gamer and not a game studio or professional game designer. These sort of games are typically made for older consoles, the Atari 2600 being a well-known one, and are still being made to this day, which just shows how dedicated gamers can really be. Anyways, the core was made by a man named Paul Osborne, and the game would have been played by 2 players who move around a circular track. On the track are 2 circles, one in the middle and one in the exterior. Both players have to deflect the ball off their own paddles and can change the axis of their paddles, which are used to hit the circle, with the fire button. The player's ball can only take 3 hits, and each hit changes part of the ball's color. Once every part is hit, the round is over. Honestly, the description to me just sounds like a more complicated version of Pong. Now, Paul had most of the game completed, but unfortunately that progress would be stopped dead in its tracks, as the hard drive the game was on was destroyed in a flood, which ultimately destroyed the game. Development on the game was slowing down anyways, as a lot of things were happening in Paul's life, he said in an email.
I've also had a lot of weird things happen over the last month. For example, our cat peed in her dryer earlier this week, and I spent the first part of the week taking apart the dryer and washing it out with bleach. Also in that last 2 weeks, both of my children fell down and cut their heads open.
Paul thought about doing a remake but never got around to it. All that exists for the actual game itself is a single screenshot that was shared on an Atari Age forum by a user named Propane13, and that's how it would be for a while. However, something interesting happened on January 10th of, I am assuming, this year. A post was made on the Atari Age forum from a user named Thomas Yench, who shared his own recreation of the game, titling it The Core 2. His version looks extremely similar to the original game, however, in order to really play this game, you do need a second person, as the game was built as a multiplayer game, so playing it on your own doesn't really work too well. Also, the controls are stiff, as it is clear you would need the Atari driver controllers in order to play it right. As with a keyboard or regular controller, it is almost impossible to play, at least for me anyways. So while there is a version of the game you can play, the original game is still lost, aside from this screenshot. And due to the original hard drive breaking, it is unlikely the game will ever surface, unless Paul decides he wants to remake the game from scratch.
So we have finally reached the last game for this video. However, there are a lot more lost Atari 2600 games, so I'm probably going to do a follow-up someday if you, the people, want it. This game was actually found in 2019, but the story of it is so interesting that I wanted to include it. So here we go.
Birthday Mania was developed by a programmer named Robert Anthony Tokar. The game was only able to be bought through a newspaper called the New Work Star Ledger. Customers would send a check to Robert, and they would receive a copy of the game personalized with their name on the title screen. The game was a simple birthday activity game with mini games such as blowing out candles on a cake and popping balloons. Now, why this game was considered lost for so long was simply due to its rarity, as because of how these games were purchased, only around 10 to 15 copies were sold, making this one of the rarest Atari 2600 games in existence. The game would fade into obscurity for years until 2009 when a copy of the game went up for auction. The game got an offer of $6,500, but the game ultimately went unsold, which is probably a good thing for the seller in hindsight, as today the game is worth $15,000 on the low end and a whopping $35,000 on the high end. Then in 2012, an Atari Age user named Atari_Warlord contacted Robert Tokar asking about the game and seeing if reproductions could be made. Robert responded by saying he would give away the copyright to the game as long as any profits went to charity. While this appears to be a huge lead in making this game readily available, this would lead to nothing for quite some time. 3 years later in 2015, a YouTube user named Trev Gauntlet uploaded a high quality video of Birthday Mania, which was played using the Atari 2600 emulator Stella. According to Trev Gauntlet, the footage came from a man named Thomas Jensch, who I have to assume is the same Thomas Jensch I mentioned in the previous entry, as that would be awfully coincidental otherwise. After this, the search would stay cold for a few more years. On July 31st, 2019, Robert Tokar's personal ROM was finally dumped online by Atari_Warlord, and an unpersonalized ROM was dumped the same day by an Atari Age user named Sean, which renders the game found and makes it so anyone can play it for free. While this sort of game wouldn't work today, I do think this is a neat idea and makes for a cool birthday gift for a friend or a loved one. Overall, just a neat piece of gaming history and one definitely worth talking about.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of the video. So thanks for watching. If you're new here and want to see more videos like this one, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell. Also, like this video and comment down below. So the more engagement my videos get, the better. I also want to apologize for the sort of hand cam sort of footage you've seen during the video. This video has been very frustrating to put together, guys, I'm not gonna lie. To the point where I've had to kind of rush down here to get some sort of content on the channel because it's been like 4 months since I put a video out. So I had to just do this with my phone real quickly to put in the video. It just is what it is. I promise this will not be like this throughout any more videos you see in the future. Anyways, next time, before we get to the 8-bit era, I want to actually look at Atari's competition. So next time, we're going to look at Lost ColecoVision games as well as the television games. We will see you then. Roll the Patreon thing.
And I want to give a shout out to our super patron Ryan Smith. If you want to be like Ryan Smith, then click the first link in the description to check out my Patreon. There's $1 or more will get you special perks like early viewings and shout outs in all our videos.